All right, so I finally want to get into angles and how I'm setting up my car to try to get it to bite on the track. One of the big things that we want to do when we're racing a car, when you're driving a car, you're driving anything, is you want to make sure that your contact with the ground is as good as it can be. You want to make sure that that tire is as much of that tire is being used as possible. Um, I think that's one area where I see a lot of difference in how people are setting up the cars. But when you look at the fast guys, when you look at uh, at the really fast RC guys that have been racing for a really long time, their cars don't have crazy angles on them. They just don't. And if you go look at serious race cars, NASCAR, Formula One, IndyCar, the cars are actually pretty square. You'll see maybe, a Formula One car, if you look at the top down view on a Formula One car, you'll see a tiny bit of toe out. And then otherwise, the angles are not radical. You only see radical angles in amateur racing. And so I think that's one area that people get too aggressive with their setups. And I think well, I don't think it makes the car harder to drive. And I think at the end of the day, really the goal is not necessarily to make the car the fastest that it can be. The goal is to make it fast and handle. Because if you can get around the track and there's a crash, because it happens all the time, this is a beginner class, right? So at the end of the day, you're racing with beginners, even if you've been racing for a long time, and maybe you get lucky and you've got a bunch of people that are seasoned racers that you're racing with and they're not crashing as much. But I think for most of us, we're going to be causing some of the wrecks, and we're going to be collected in a lot of the wrecks. And so we really want to make sure the car drives as well as it can. What I've found as far as setting up the car, and I guess my thinking as far as setting up the car, is you want to make the car's always turning left pretty much all the time. I've found that my very fastest setups require a lot of steering input and throttle input. And then when it seems like it's fast to have it set up where you're just like turning full steer and modulating the throttle, it's not as fast. As much as it seems like that would be a fast way to have the car set up on the track, you watch anybody that's running the fastest cars in oval RC racing, they are making tons of adjustments in the throttle, in the steering. These are the same way. You need to be steering the car and adjusting the throttle. If you want it to be truly fast, and that again, it comes down to drivability and setup. And so what I'm doing as far as sort of my base thing is actually pushing the car to the side when I make my adjustments. And what you'll find is that, there's slop, right? There's play in the in the drivetrain of the car. And so the only way to make sure that that's consistent in the way that we're truly driving the car is to make all of your adjustments, your camber really, make it with pressure to the outside of the car. So I just push on the side of the chassis whenever I've got my camber tool out and I'm adjusting that. And what that's doing is that's adjusting it based on what the car is doing in the real world. And so again, I was saying you want to make sure that tire is contacting the ground as much as possible. If your tire is at an angle when you're steering, if it's got a bunch of camber on it or not enough camber on it, the tire isn't going to be contacting the ground and so as much. And so you've got a little, you might end up with a little tiny patch of tire that's actually on the ground. You just don't have as much grip. So you want to make sure, again, you have as much grip as you can, with some caveat. What I found is that you can actually adjust it super, super steep. And I think a really great driver will run it really, really steep. I'm not a great driver yet. I'm still figuring out how to drive these things. I've been racing RC cars now for 7 weeks. And so my handling skills they're actually getting okay, but I know that I've got a long ways to go. I'm racing a guy that's racing these, that his car, I don't think his car is any faster than my car. He's a lot faster driver. It makes a big difference. But yeah, getting it set up so that when you're doing your camber angles, that tire is as on the ground as possible. And then as far as the angles, what I've found is I'm actually running my car at 2 degrees. So if you know, looking at the car and you've got pressure on it, I've got it 2 degrees, and I've actually got it really simple. So I'm still cambered in on the front and rear, and I'm actually at 2 degrees, just like the factory calls for. So the only difference is that I'm making those adjustments while the car is pushed to the side. And what I found is that little bit of camber is giving me enough slip so that I can drive the car. As I steepen up those angles, again, I'm a pretty new driver, so I don't have the skill to handle the steeper angle on the car. So what I found is I can actually make the car significantly quicker by standing up, particularly the inside tire. So running it at 0 and then keeping the outside tires at 2 degrees of camber. The car will run a lot faster, but it's also a lot harder to drive. Again, I think, you know, as I look at more seasoned drivers, I think their cars are steeper. But for anybody like me that's just figuring this out, having the little bit softer angle, just making sure, again, drivability is king. We've got to be able to steer around traffic and get around the track. If you can get around the track without any crashing, holy cow, you're so much faster. So you've got to do anything you can to keep the car just easy to drive. All right, so now I want to get into steering angle or toe. This is one thing you want to make sure whenever you're setting your toe angles, you've got your car turned on and you've got your adjustments set to 0, your steering set to 0 on your radio. That way you're actually getting an accurate measurement. I got really into the weeds on this. Like about a year ago, I started learning about this thing called Ackerman angle. It's actually deals with how cars actually steer. An RC car like these, but you know, like what we're driving, when you steer, there's 0 Ackerman. So what that means is when you steer, the tires turn the exact same amount. In your street car, in your car that you drive every day, it has positive Ackerman, which is actually also what we want in the oval RC car. And what that does is when you turn, the distance, the angle that your inside tire needs to be different than the angle for the outside of the tire. You're gonna steer, it's gonna steer more on the inside. So ultimately, you know, just kind of putting it into perspective with my hands, you're gonna steer like this on your street car. What that does is it actually keeps the tire from skidding. And it's gonna make you turn faster. Ironically, Formula One cars, this is actually how I learned about this, Formula One cars actually use reverse Ackerman. So when they actually steer like this, and they're doing it so that they can heat up that tire so that they have more grip for the next turn, because they're turning it, you know, they're hitting 5 Gs in a corner. So with those aggressive G forces, they want to generate as much heat in that tire as they can. And so they actually skid that tire on purpose. For our purposes, for oval racing, we want to keep that tire as perfect as at an angle as we can. So I think everybody pretty much knows that you're going to want to run toe out. So you're going to want to have your front tires, the front of the front tires pointed out. That has a couple of effects. It actually makes the car easier to handle, because when you start to steer, the car won't really start to steer until you get to past that point of what your angle is. And so that's a positive thing, especially for a new driver. More seasoned driver, again, you know, if you're racing 10 scale buggy, for example, you're going to run the car a little bit more square. You're turning both directions, and those cars also turn super aggressive. You're able to set them up with tons of grip, and unlike these cars, actually lowering that center of gravity and getting tons and tons of grip. But here, since we're running oval, and this is true for any class of oval, you want to make sure that tire isn't slowing you down. And if that tire is running at the wrong angle, right, we want more steering on the inside tire. So towed out is good multiple ways, because it's helping with our Ackerman steering, because we can't, it's not in the car. Tow out will give us some of that. So as we steer, that angle is going to be a little bit more. Weird little race trick, but it works. Yeah, I don't know the exact angle for my track. Right now I have it at +2+2. It'll be fun to kind of mess around with that in time. I'm so happy with the car right now. I'm just hesitant to make any changes, but ultimately it's a huge racer trick, and it will make you faster. I think the last thing that I want to touch on from a car setup standpoint as you're racing is making sure that you start out the race with good clean tires. The kind of known trick is to use just basically thin down simple green. Right now I'm actually using car wash, which is actually very similar. It's actually a bicycle wash that's very similar to simple green. It just kind of removes a little bit of that oil, especially if you're running on anywhere where there might actually be oil, to help keep that oil off the tires. But there'll also be oil. There's a lot of people that are saucing tires, and sometimes you can pick that stuff up. It's going to change the property of the tire. So we want to make sure that they're really, really clean. I do that so far, and I don't know the best practice for this yet, but so far what I've been doing is I've been doing the deep clean on the tires after the races. During the races, I'm just cleaning the tires with water. Mostly I'm just trying to maintain that initial property of the tire the way that the factory intended it. I just have a feeling this, and again, I'm probably wrong, but I think drag racing and being on concrete, you want to sauce your tires like crazy. These cars, we've got grip issues to begin with, so saucing the tires I think is probably a negative thing. But making sure your tires are good and clean, it makes a big difference. And the warm, you'll see as you're racing, having the tires, once you've been running for a while, the tires actually feel, the car gets better, and that's because your tires are actually warming up. So I haven't gone to the expense of adding tire warmers, but I do go out onto the track and I run, I weave the car and try and generate some heat into those tires just so that I can have a decent start. I don't know 100% sure if it's making a difference, but it feels like it. So hopefully it's true. Yeah. And then in conclusion to the video, I really hope that this helps. I've had a really interesting journey trying to figure out how to set these cars up, and I feel like there's not much information out there. The cars are pretty new, so it's been a challenge to get anything, just because there's really just not very much information out there to even glean from, which I guess it's made it really fun for me to figure out how to set the car up and make the car actually drivable. Because man, when I went out for my first race, like I said, I know my handling has improved since I started, but I also went back to those setups and I wasn't that far off from my best times. I mean, you're doing 40 laps, you're going to put some good laps in. But yeah, so hopefully this video will help somebody out there and make this little Traxxas / Mud Boss or Modified a little more fun for you. We'll see you in the next video.